the fastest growing media group in North America.
Hello and welcome to Y Media Newsroom. I'm Ramona Singh, and it's always so great to spend this time with you. We saw July 1st come and go on Canada Day, and it was the big day. It wasn't just Canada's 159th birthday that we were celebrating, which is always so great to look forward to when it comes to all the community events and the fireworks and gathering with family. Yet all eyes were on the CUSMA review. That was the deadline on July 1st, 2026. Why was that the case? Well, that was the 6-year mark for when CUSMA was first negotiated and signed and came into effect on July 1st, 2020. And we all waited in anticipation for possibly months, maybe weeks also, where we saw Canada formally request a review and say that Canada wants it to be renewed for 16 years. And that was a formal request sent to the United States as well as Mexico. And as well, Mexico did the same thing. Mexico made the formal request that, yes, they want to renew CUSMA or USMCA agreement for another 16 years. And then it was the case where we were waiting on President Trump as well as the administration to see where things stand. I mean, if you recall, we even covered, has Canada had the first sit down with the administration to see if there's any talks in terms of renewing it and extending it. We saw talks that took place between Mexico and the United States at least 2 times, and we're waiting for when is Canada's turn to come to the table and have those talks. It did happen once, and then we also watched the G7. Will the Prime Minister and the President have a bilateral meeting? And perhaps in that meeting, will they discuss CUSMA? And that was what we're watching. We did catch a hot mic minute where we had our Prime Minister essentially lean over to the President and in his ear say a few words about Chinese EVs that are coming to Canada and that there's a cap for it. And when the Prime Minister was asked questions at the end of the G7 press conference, well, he said, you know what, we had, 5 or 7 times where we had a conversation for a few minutes, over these past couple of days. And that's essentially what we got, that, there's nothing to worry about. Then we also saw the Gordie Howe Bridge, which is off Windsor, is not being opened. This is something that Canada has essentially foot the bill to be able to have another bridge go to the United States from the Canadian border. And there was supposed to be this big opening, and then it was delayed. And then again, the Prime Minister said, oh, it's delayed and we're resolving whatever issues that there may be, but there's no drama around it. And so we are wondering what is actually happening. And then if you recall, there was the joint team on when it comes to surveillance, defense surveillance between the United States and Canada, and that's been, and you had the United States administration, Trump's administration, essentially pull out, putting Canada in a situation of like, okay, so we're not going to be doing some joint defense surveillance together that's been in place for decades. And when it comes to the CUSMA renewal, we're not hearing much from what the administration wants to do. We do know that they are upset about the digital services tax. They're upset about the dairy market and having more access to it. And when it comes to the auto sector, and then we heard the President many times say that he doesn't need Canadian auto and Canadian lumber and Canadian steel and Canadian aluminum. So I think Canada was, still waiting to see, will there be good news come July 1st? Well, July 1st came and went, and then it was announced that the U.S. has no intention to renew for another 16 years. So where does that leave Canada? Well, that means that we go into an annual review. An annual review is a time where you're going to negotiate terms that each side will put forward. And in this case, it could be the president that is going to ask for more American-made auto parts. Well, we know in the auto sector that a part will cross the border multiple times before a vehicle is made. And so that begs the question of, when the negotiations come around every year, what will be the terms that the president will push for? Is it going to be something to the detriment of Canadian workers, to Canadian union workers when it comes to perhaps the auto sector, manufacturing, steel, aluminum, lumber? Those are all big questions that we did not hear answers to from the Prime Minister on July 2nd. The day after the deadline. Well, we heard other big news from the Prime Minister and Premier Smith, which we'll cover in a bit of a detail very shortly. But, you have this situation where we're wondering, what is Ottawa's plan? We do know that they talked about diversifying away from the United States. But if you can imagine, if the United States takes 70 to 75% of our exports, that makes the United States our biggest customer yet. And they take about 90% of Canadian oil. So that makes the United States our biggest customer in our oil and gas sector, as well as in all other trade. And this agreement, the CUSMA agreement's worth $1.3 trillion. We're looking at $3.2 to $3.5 billion that cross the border between Canada and the United States every 24 hours. So I think it begs the question when we want to ask our commander-in-chief, which would be the Prime Minister, hey, Prime Minister, what is your plan? What is your plan for Canadians, for Canadian workers, for the private sector that's already seeing investment dollars leave Canada because of the unpredictability that it's created in terms of not knowing if your biggest customer is going to still buy from you, or there's going to be a massive tariff on certain industries, which will essentially not give you any understanding of what does my goods cost to go to market, right? Essentially, when you know what, if the item that you are exporting, if you know that there's no tariff on it, or at least if you know what is the tariff amount, is it 10%, is it 20%, is it 25%, then you can make some decisions in terms of how much does it cost to obtain your goods. How much is your overhead if you're in the manufacturing sector in terms of your operating costs to open your doors? How much does it cost to have employees? How much does it cost to be able to package your goods and export them? What is that tariff? And if you do not know what the end cost is going to be when it gets to the customer, then you're in a situation where you do not know if there's profit in a business. And we're not talking about a non-for-profit industry. We're talking about businesses that essentially exist to solve a problem, but also make a profit in the process, and to be able to hire individuals and have a workforce, and to be able to have an output that contributes to the Canadian GDP. So given that this is our scenario, we are waiting for the Prime Minister to essentially tell us what is the plan, given that we're going to go into this rolling period of annual review. So what did we get instead? We got an announcement from Alberta. We had the Premier Danielle Smith, as well as the Prime Minister, make a big announcement when it comes to the energy sector. Essentially, the Prime Minister has talked about making Canada a superpower. In fact, an energy superpower, knowing that Canada has the fourth largest reserves of oil that has essentially gone untapped. And if you recall, for the last 10 years, we've had the Liberal government under Prime Minister Justin Trudeau pass a lot of anti-oil laws when it comes to what Albertans feel, which has also put us in a situation where it's fast forwarded us to a place where Albertans are looking at a separatism movement. There is going to be a referendum on a referendum come October 19th, which the Premier has essentially scheduled. And so there's a lot going on here in Canada that is quite concerning. And we're already at the halfway point of the year, and we're looking to see what does this mean for Canada. We know that when it comes to GDP numbers, the latest number for the month of for the month of April, put Canada at a 0.5% increase in the GDP. So we know that Canada would be out of a technical recession, which we were in based on Q4 of 2025 numbers, as well as Q1 of 2026 numbers. And given that April is the first month of Q2, then it put Canada in a better situation. We also saw the job numbers improve a bit. We also saw the unemployment numbers improve a bit. So does this mean that we're going to be in a situation where we'll go back to what the situation was in Q1 of this year because of this CUSMA fact that it didn't get renewed. And what this means is that investment dollars will leave Canada because there's no predictability. Why do I say that? Well, think about your hard-earned dollars, right? When you want to spend, you need to know what is your return on investment. If you do not know what investment you're going to have, is your money going to be worth what you're buying? And will it multiply in terms of its investment? If you do not have any level of predictability, nobody wants to flush their cash down the toilet. Nobody wants to just burn their cash not knowing if it's going to the right place. Is it going to be safe? Is it going to be stable? What does that all mean? And that is why you have Canadian businesses say that, even before the CUSMA renewal deadline of July 1st, there was already slowing in terms of capital investments. There was also slowing in hiring. So the question remains, what does this mean for Canada? But I do want to make the announcement that the Prime Minister, as well as Premier Danielle Smith, made yesterday, essentially saying that Canada is taking a step forward to when it comes to becoming an energy superpower, which is what the Prime Minister has been talking about. So now, if you recall, there was the massive MOU that was signed last year, and then the agreement that was made between Ottawa and Alberta to be able to not only reduce what would be the carbon capture of the amount that it would cost, but also prolong the period of increasing that price point. And so this was signed, and this is something that you had Premier Danielle Smith really tell Albertans, look, Alberta's right now getting the attention of Ottawa. So far, we've always felt that there was Western alienation and that the center of power and center of gravity is between Toronto, Montreal, and Ottawa, and that most of Albertans have felt ignored when it comes to their oil and gas sector. And then the Premier was saying, listen, now we're actually getting some things off the ground, that we're seeing that Ottawa is now paying attention. So yesterday's news was that Ottawa and Alberta have unveiled plans for a new oil pipeline that would go from Alberta to the West Coast. And essentially it would double the oil sand productions over the next decade, according to the Prime Minister as well as the Premier, saying that when it comes to environmental concerns, that has always been the case when it comes to Indigenous communities and when it comes to environmental groups and when it comes to BC in general. So what they've announced yesterday is that this new 1 million barrel per day oil pipeline will be connected from Alberta to BC, and it would go to the southwest coast. Essentially, the project would largely follow the existing Trans Mountain pipeline corridor, and it would avoid British Columbia's protected north coast where oil tankers remain prohibited. So you have Alberta that essentially originally did prefer to have northern export route because it provides a shorter shipping time to Asia. But however, after the long-standing tanker ban that's been in place in Canada, concerns were also raised by Indigenous communities as well as, what would really take place. So they decided to go along with the existing Trans Mountain pipeline, and it would be an export hub from southern BC. And now this is estimated to increase a 1 million barrel per day. This project now is going to be first a private sector partner, is what's announced. So you have Pembina Pipeline will initially own about 10% stake with the option to increase its ownership to 20% after construction. And the federally owned Trans Mountain Corporation will lead the development. You had Premier Danielle Smith say that the pipeline could double oil sand production in the next 10 to 15 years, generating billions in new government revenues that could support in what she says healthcare, infrastructure, defense spending, and Indigenous economic partnerships. The announcement came with Ottawa saying that they acknowledge Canada is going to be in a place where it may unlikely meet its greenhouse gas emission targets while it's expanding its energy exports, but it is a time where we have Ottawa putting the economy ahead of what we saw take place in terms of climate change and carbon capture, which was essentially a big part of Canadian policy for the last 10 years. So massive shift in terms of what Ottawa is doing and taking a look at, what does it mean in the global markets? We've had this ongoing war with Ukraine and Russia going on more than 4 years. We saw for 3+ months of the war that took place between United States, Israel, and Iran, with Iran choking the Strait of Hormuz, which provides 20% of the global oil supply and LNG. And that positioned Canada in a place to be able to be the reliable partner to export its natural gas, LNG, and crude to the markets, right? When you have a situation where there is a lot of demand that is necessary, then Canada is in a place for providing that supply. So this was a big announcement that was made yesterday, right off the heel of this entire CUSMA situation where President Trump decided not to renew for another 16 years. So we're covering this in quite detail because we want to know what it means for Canadian workers. We're hoping to hear from Ottawa very soon, even though they're in recess. But essentially, if it is an emergency time, we'd like to hear in terms of what is Ottawa planning, in terms of what sectors will be hard hit. Is there going to be a plan for more investment dollars in those sectors to be able to save jobs? And of course, we're going to cover that in detail with you. We're going to take a quick break and we'll be right back.